founder, president, and CEO of Global Guardian, retired Special Forces and Green Beret officer, has lived and operated in over 70 countries around the world. He's going to present global and domestic threat brief, mitigate risk, and operate safely. We have to pay attention to these things today, ladies and gentlemen. Take it away, Dale.
Stephen, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. As you can see here, you see the background of where I'm coming from. That being said, some of these topics are considered a little bit dark at times, and I certainly don't mean to be the Darth Vader of the briefing here. I find myself in that position a lot. But basically, from what I've lived in my adult life and now what I do in business kind of mandates that I'm always looking at things from a worst case perspective. So I'll present in that light, knowing that we could only focus on good things, which are much easier and a lot more pleasant to talk about. But I think the intent is to drive thought and to give you some things to think about beyond your normal day-to-day. And most importantly, I certainly don't have all the answers. And I want you to question my thesis on some of this as we go through, and then we can address in the Q&A down the road. As you look at this, I'll start in the United States. As you look at that map, there's some good news here, and this is a good news story. We're now averaging 1.3 million vaccinations a day and ever rising. That's a good news story. That slide says 27 million. That's dated. That number as of this morning is 39 million Americans in the U.S. have now been vaccinated with at least their first shot in some cases. That's good news. At this pace, trying to be a little predictive, and you see this in the news and articles, and it's a moving target, but just in general terms, we're targeting 50% of the population by the end of summer, or mid to late summer, should be vaccinated. And we're projecting 70% of the population, or herd immunity, if you're familiar with that term, by September. So by this fall, we're projecting we should start to feel confident and start to see the world open up a little bit. Now, I think some of those projections could be accelerated, which is what we all want, but this is so far a good news story. As you look at this on a global scale, there's still a lot of problems out there. I think you're going to look at this and see in the Europe and the West and the wealthier countries in Asia and the Middle East are all doing well. Right now, as you see, Israel and the UAE, both small, easily controlled, are doing the best in the world right now, which are great indications. The fact that the Russian vaccination has now been validated by the Brits at 91% effective is a great news story. Again, the more the better, but I think we should all be patient here because we have to assume, yes, the wealthier countries in Asia and the Middle East and Europe and the US will make progress quickly. The issue will be the third world won't, and the developing world won't. So just because you've been vaccinated, your employees have been vaccinated, your business is an environment where you're seeing progress, that doesn't necessarily mean the rest of the world is going to automatically open up. Governments are going to have to make hard decisions on when and how. And I think there's just a bit of cautionary tale there to watch the rest of the world, not just your part of the world or your state, as we go through this process. Domestic unrest, this is a bit of bad news here, and it's mixed, of course. One, you've all seen this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You're seeing it, you touch it, you hear it every day. We've had, since the summer, enormous amount of emotion outpour in this country over police brutality. I would simply summarize as there's good and bad in every organization. People make good decisions and bad decisions in every organization. And I don't think the police are any different. They're human. That being said, as you look down towards the bottom, I think the police issue needs to be reframed. We should frame this as, how do we retrain the police? I don't think we should have a discussion about defunding the police. I don't think that's real. I think we have to evaluate how we train our police and what our expectation is. And here's my last comment. And I was never a police officer. I'm close to it, but I'm not and haven't been. I would simply say, if you had a son or daughter, would you want them to be a police officer today? With everything we put on our police, we pay them a 45 to 60 grand a year. We expect them to solve all our societal problems. I don't know that's a fair expectation. So I think there's a lot there. Admitting we've had police who have made bad decisions, clearly. I think obviously the economy is grinding until we get through at least fourth quarter this year with an upswing, hopefully. I think the uncertainty continues all the way through this year and into 2022. Obviously, you're seeing the second impeachment, and I think the partisan divide in this country remains and will continue for quite some time. As you look at all of this, the big question you have to ask yourself is, how do you protect your people, and how do you protect your business and your family? And the really negative side here in the US domestically is, you look at the murder rates on the right side of this chart. That is not a good news story. When COVID hit, everything kind of came to a stop and a lot of bad things went to ground. Well, one of the things that rebounded very quickly, knowing that murder and crime in this country in general have decreased for 20 plus years. Every year it's gotten better. COVID hits, things get even better. And then with unemployment, uncertainty, and a lot of desperate people in this country, with 10 million people plus being unemployed today, this is the result. Enormous spikes all the way up to, as you can see, 74% in Seattle, 57% in Atlanta, 54% in Boston, so on and so forth. You get the idea. This is alarming and not good for business. It's not good for our country. It's not good for our social fabric. It's a problem. So we do have a problem, and I think we come out of this problem. It's all about economics. As soon as we get people employed and they have a stable job and they're not desperate, this gets alleviated pretty quickly. It all goes hand in hand. As we're looking forward, I think the vaccination is great news. As I started, it's a good news story, but I think we have to be cautious on speed. I don't think the audience should be thinking that we are going to get through this by summer. I hear a lot of people talking like that, and I think that's it's a bit aggressive, a little too optimistic, frankly. I think the global economy will follow, but again, the third world is going to be slow and much, much further behind us in speed of recovery economically. In this country and abroad, social decay and desperation, I've noted it. If we have spikes in murder rates here in the top 35 countries in the United States, what do you think is happening in Nigeria? What do you think is happening in Uganda? What do you think is happening in Mexico? Now, those stats aren't nearly as tightly controlled and monitored as they are in the US. The assumption have to be these are really going to be, if they were medium to high risk in the past, they're absolutely high risk moving forward for at least that first year, year and a half. Global conflicts, like a movie, if you think of all the conflicts back in 2019, if you think through what was happening, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Syrian civil war, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the Cold War that's going on, the bombing of Yemen, the narco trafficking coming out of Afghanistan and Mexico, all those conflicts and spikes of violence that went to pause, went to ground when COVID started, they're all going to come back. And I think you have to prepare yourself for that. And lastly, travel. This is really important to almost all businesses, is I think we have to assume that by fourth quarter, we start to see 30, 40, 50% of what was pre-COVID. I think it takes well into 2022 before we get to 60, 70% of what it was pre-COVID. And realistically, I think it's 2023 before we're at 100% of pre-COVID levels, if you will. Ultimately, last comment. As you think through reopening is going to be just as hard, if not as hard, as when you shut down in the first place and sent your workforce home or isolated your business and put it on pause. I think you should be thinking of policy right now. I think you should be talking about personnel and under what conditions and what is your policy. Are you going to mandate vaccinations? Can you mandate that in your state? You're going to have to talk through the legal exposure, if you will, of what those policies are going to look like and how you're going to reopen. In both the short term and long term. And the key is start now. Long term, if you're looking at travel or you're right here in the United States, as you reopen, I think you have to think through and review. Now's the time to do it. Review your insurance policies. I think a lot of people are caught by surprise to find out that their businesses were not covered financially, physically, or with their personnel when COVID started. This is a problem. People need to review their insurance and look at their vendor platforms and really ask, did it perform under COVID conditions? If it didn't, you need to be relooking a change. So I'll pause there. I look for everybody's questions, comments, and to challenge some of these thesis when we get into the Q&A and some of the panels. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dale. Dale Buckner, ladies and gentlemen, you will not want to miss his deeper dive, and we'll look forward to that. Dale, always a pleasure. Thanks again.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Bye for now, everyone.